It's all part of their code, and so far, they must think we're too dumb to notice.
The tragedy of Rwanda is that for a while people completely forgot the humanity of their neighbors. People who'd lived side by side for generations, people familiar with each other who knew each other well as human beings, suddenly forgot that other people were human beings. And that is always what happens when genocide occurs. The people of Rwanda are rebuilding bravely and prayerfully and hopefully at the moment, and our prayers and our thoughts are with them. All of us join with those prayers that we may never again, anywhere in the world, forget the humanity of our neighbors, that we may all be prepared to stand alongside our neighbors in love, in solidarity, and in compassion.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 9th of May 2016 and it's about 1:30, and obviously I'm making you my usual end of the weekend video to reassure you that I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend, and I think I forgot the last couple of weeks to reassure you that I hadn't been seducing any priests over the weekend, so I'll just reassure you about that now as well. And also, I want to say that me reassuring you that I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend doesn't mean that I seduce them during the week either. I just thought I'd better clarify that in case you were getting excited about it. Anyway, you'd be furiously jealous anyway, wouldn't you, because it isn't you. So, I thought this evening we could carry on our chat about the London bombings, which you provide propaganda for, to programme people to accept that it was Muslims who did the London bombings, which were a hoax anyway. So we'll accept this spectre of Islamic terrorism and the official narrative of the events that we've just been given without there being any inquiry. So this is your purpose as a propagandist and perception manager for the New World Order, as I've said before. And I'm talking this evening about a lecture that you gave at the Sant'Egidio International Meeting of Prayer for Peace. I don't know how to pronounce that really, I think it's an Italian name. And you gave this lecture on the 11th of September 2005, so that's another one of those amazing coincidences, isn't it? Anyway, you gave this lecture in Lyons in France, which I think is significant because there's some things in it that I don't think you could have got away with saying in Britain because people would have known the context more. So the amount of crap you're talking has actually increased because you're not just talking specialist crap in this lecture, you're actually talking generalised crap as well, that people in Britain would have wondered what you were talking about, I think. So anyway, you start off. My diary for the 7th of July involved a very early start from London in order to travel to the north of England. So I've mentioned the timeline before. I don't know what archbishops call very early, but for me it certainly could be no later than 7 AM, and even that isn't very early, I don't think. 6 AM is very early, 7 AM is just early. So you're implying really that you set off about 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, you must have been coming up here by mule if it took you that long to get here. Which, you know, your timeline doesn't make sense as it becomes apparent later on. I was due to meet a number of Muslim leaders in West Yorkshire, a region with a very high Muslim population, and to visit some of their institutions. The invitation arose from the close partnership in the area between the Anglican Diocese of Wakefield and several local Muslim groups. We had almost arrived in the town, where the first meeting was to take place, when the message came through on my chaplain's mobile phone that the London Underground had been closed because of what looked like a bomb attack. Well, as I've said before, the first reports were of a power surge, and it wasn't actually confirmed that it was supposed to be bombs that had gone off until about 11 o'clock in the media. And even Scotland Yard didn't confirm it until 10:30. So this makes me suspicious about the story already, that the timeline just doesn't hang together. We managed to confirm that my daughter, who travels across London to school each day, had got there safely. So your daughter would have been about 15 at the time. You're bringing in your daughter to add a personal touch to this story, that you were worried about someone who personally might have been blown to bits in this, what is a hoax, but you know, people thought bombs had gone off, so it's to bring in this personal touch that you were terribly worried about your daughter, who you're obviously not worried about at all. You don't care about her at all. You don't care about anybody because you're a psychopath. But if you cared about your daughter, you wouldn't be providing crap propaganda like this and selling her future away, and that of any children she may have, to a tyrannical one world government that wants to kill us all off and enslave everybody who's left. So that would be no kind of future for your daughter. So you're adding this into the story to tug at people's heartstrings and to make it less likely that they will question the narrative that you're telling. And you did the same thing more or less in your rendition of what was supposed to have taken place when you were supposed to be in Manhattan on 9/11, and you talked about rescuing tiny children and having to run with them, and your friend Fred Burnham told an entirely different story of the escape. So you'd invented this anyway about rescuing children from 9/11, but the purpose is people instinctively want to protect children, so they're more horrified by events that would harm children, who are the most vulnerable people, and it just makes these dastardly terrorists seem even worse if you're talking about the tiny children and your daughter, who may have also been harmed in these events. So this is why you've mentioned your daughter. By the time we arrived, it had become clear that more than one incident had happened, and that the likelihood was that a terrorist group had been responsible. So this calls into question the timeline again. You weren't even at the place when you originally got this message, and so now later on you find out that there's been more than one incident. So I just can't imagine what time you call very early in the morning if you were getting all this information before you even got there. This meant that already when I stepped out of the car at the Muslim madrasa, where the first meeting was to occur, there was a great deal of emotion in the air. My Muslim hosts were anxious and confused. Everyone was apprehensive. And then you go on to say later on, when I emerged from going around the madrasa. So I've said before, it isn't a madrasa. the place that you were visiting. In any case, madrasa is only the Arabic word for school, and it tends to be used as a name for an Islamic school, although it not necessarily teaching Islam, and not necessarily are all the students Muslims either, but it tends to be used by speakers of other languages to refer to a Muslim school, madrasa. But this wasn't a madrasa anyway, it was a community centre more or less, and a mosque that you visited, run by the Indian Muslim Welfare Society, and I'm going to put a little video that they made, their kind of annual report for 2015 at the end of this video. It's only about 3 minutes long, but it gives an impression of the kind of things that they do there. So you say, when I emerged from going around the madrasa, a television crew had assembled and several local journalists. Well, there's only two possibilities for this story, in my opinion. Either you're lying and a television crew hadn't assembled, or this event was definitely pre-planned and a television crew turned up to interview you there because somebody in the media already knew that this was going to happen and that you were going to be on hand to be providing this propaganda for it. There is absolutely no way on this earth a television crew would just be turning up in Palais. It's completely ridiculous. I mean, the nearest television stations, there's Yorkshire Television and BBC Look North studios are in Leeds, which is the nearest centre of population, and there's several large mosques and Islamic institutions in Leeds, so why on earth they'd trek out to Palais is beyond my power of imagining. So you're either making this up about a television crew turning up, or the whole event was pre-planned. I was able to make a first unscripted statement on television. Well, I don't even know if you were on television, if this story is even true, but if you were making any statements on television, it wouldn't have been unscripted, because you always read from the script, don't you, Rowan? You've got the script already, it's embedded in your head. So, let's have a look. I was able to make a first unscripted statement on television directly in front of one of the largest Muslim institutions in northern England, to speak not only of the shock and condemnation which I wanted to express, but of the revulsion of those who stood around me at this indiscriminate and brutal violence. Well, I don't know whether this is one of the largest Muslim institutions in northern England. And Muslim institution and madrasa, well, it is a Muslim institution, but you previously referred to it as a madrasa, and you're kind of making it seem like, I don't know, there's some kind of takeover going on. This is what you're making it sound like, directly in front of one of the largest Muslim institutions in northern England. I don't know if that's true either, I would have to do some more research into it. To speak not only of the shock and condemnation which I wanted to express, but of the revulsion of those who stood around me. So, were the people who stood around you, which you've previously said were Muslims, were they revolted then? Was it their revulsion? Or are you talking about your revulsion of the people who were standing around? It's not exactly clear. And you do make ambiguous statements like that quite a lot. So, I'm going to comment on this phrase that you've used, indiscriminate and brutal violence, a bit later on. Throughout that extraordinary day, the same message was reinforced time and again, as more and more details came in. The local Muslims involved in the meetings went out of their way to offer words of condolence and to insist that this action was not in their name, whoever was responsible. So you appear to be supporting the Muslims here and saying how, oh, you know, the majority of Muslims are nice people, but in fact you're providing propaganda saying that the Muslims were the terrorists. Well, why would the Muslims be turning up saying whoever did this was not in their name? I mean, why weren't there a bunch of Buddhists turning up and saying it wasn't in their name, or a bunch of atheists? The assumption is already, without any investigation, that it was Muslims who did it. And as I've said before, British people would normally think the IRA was blowing things up back in this time, and it took a lot of programming for people to associate this event with Muslim activists or terrorists or whatever. And this, in my opinion, is the purpose for having the G8 conference in Britain at the time, so George Bush could be wheeled out, George W. Bush, to make some statement about solidarity against this terrorist threat. And of course, if you've got George W. Bush, the President of the United States, making that statement, then everybody's going to immediately associate the London bombings with 9/11 rather than with terrorism from the IRA, which is what British people would previously have thought. It was a day of cruel ironies. The substance of our discussions was the prospects for more and better cooperation between Christian and Muslim communities in the work of urban regeneration in a very poorly resourced region. Several of the Muslims present, including a Member of Parliament and many involved in local government, manifestly saw themselves as a natural part of the political landscape in Britain. Well, why wouldn't they? Some of my own contribution to the discussion drew upon my experience a few weeks earlier when I had chaired a lengthy consultation in Sarajevo on the theme of how Muslims and Christians could identify a common agenda in the Western social context. So you're comparing Islamic terrorism in Britain and the situation of Muslims living in northern England in this region, as you're comparing it to Sarajevo, to Yugoslavia, where we had a highly propagandised message being pumped through our media all the time about the events that were taking place there, which had been engineered by the banksters to start with, crashing the economy. So you're planting the idea in people's heads that there's some similarity here between Northern England and Sarajevo. So that's something we've all got to look forward to then. And the discussion that you were chairing in Sarajevo was one of your Building Bridges seminars, which I've already made a video about. I was able to make a first unscripted statement on television directly in front of one of the largest Muslim institutions in northern England to speak not only of the shock and condemnation which I wanted to express, but of the revulsion of those who stood around me at this indiscriminate and brutal violence. So I've read this statement again because I want to talk about indiscriminate and brutal violence, which you're referring to the London bombings here, and this is what you say about Sarajevo. Sarajevo had involved leading Muslim academics from across the world, as well as Christians of all confessions, working together against the background of a recent history of brutal slaughter and civil strife. So you're clearly comparing what's taking place in Britain between Muslim terrorists and the rest of society and what took place in Sarajevo in Yugoslavia. So you described the London bombings as indiscriminate and brutal violence, and the recent history of Sarajevo as brutal slaughter and civil strife. So you're using the same language to talk about the two things, you're comparing the two, and you're describing them in the same way. You're alluding to a similarity between these two events. So that's the end of my comments on that lecture. It wasn't really a full lecture, just the address at the opening meeting. But I just want to refer really to the title of a lecture that you gave the next day. Well, it was a forum debate, and this is the lecture that you gave for this debate. Is Europe at its end? Sant'Egidio International Meeting of Prayer for Peace. So you go there and provide all this propaganda about Islamic terrorism and compare the north of England and what took place in London to Sarajevo and to this brutal civil strife and brutal and indiscriminate slaughter and all this kind of thing. And then the next day you're taking part in a debate and giving a lecture entitled Is Europe at its End? Now, I'm not going to comment on this lecture because I have read it, and you're mainly talking about European history developing and coming to the point where there's a separation between the state and the church, basically. That's what you're saying. And then you talk about the Islamic understanding of the relationship between religion and the state is different because it's a more integrated political, religious ideology, for want of a better word. So this is what the talk is about, and what you don't say, but what's implied in this lecture, is that Europe's really at an end because of Muslim immigration into Europe, because European history and society has moved towards the point where the church and state are separate and religion and state affairs are separate. You talk about secularism a bit. And the Islamic understanding is quite different, really, whereas the Christian understanding is that people often stand against the state. Really the Islamic system is more to integrate state affairs with Islamic belief and law and so on. And so this is why you're saying, is Europe at an end? You're really implying that Europe is at an end because a foreign ideology has been kind of imported, and this is a clash of civilizations. You don't say this overtly, but this is what you're implying in the lecture, that there's this clash of civilizations between the Islamic world and the Islamic understanding of the relationship between religion and state affairs, and this very different secular state and separate religion, and Christians standing against the state, which has happened a lot in history. So that's the gist of the lecture that you gave. Is Europe at its end? And what you're really saying is, well, Europe is at its end as we understand it. So I'll put a link to the lecture in the show notes anyway. So that was the lecture the following day after the talk you gave on the 11th of September. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now because I've been waffling on for quite some time, and hopefully at the beginning of this video there should be some information about the engineered collapse of Yugoslavia, but since I'm having some copyright problems with YouTube, I don't know how well edited that video is going to be at the end when it's all put together. But I'll put the link to the whole documentary in the show notes, which is 2 hours long, but it's an absolutely excellent documentary about Yugoslavia, and it's well worth watching the whole thing. But I've edited some clips out of it, and I need to edit some more clips out of it, so I don't know how it's all going to hang together at the end, if they keep saying it's blocked worldwide because of copyright issues. So I'll see how that goes. But anyway, I'm probably going to make you another video tomorrow about the London bombings, because I want to particularly talk about the Bible references you made in Thought for the Day, which I've already commented on in my last video, but I want to talk about the Bible references more, so I may do that tomorrow or later in the week. So until my next video, be alert. Hasta la próxima.
يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، زدني من الإيمان الله يا الله.
يا خالق الأكوان
يا منزل القرآن،
يا خالق الأكوان
يا منزل القرآن، زدني من الإيمان الله يا الله.
الله 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 الله
اغفر لي يا ربي عصياني وذنبي، اغفر لي يا ربي عصياني وذنبي، الدمع في عيني فارحمني يا الله، الدمع في عيني فارحمني يا الله، اغفر لي يا ربي عصياني وذنبي، اغفر لي يا ربي عصياني وذنبي، الدمع في عيني فارحمني يا الله، الدمع في عيني فارحمني يا الله.
يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، زدني من الإيمان الله يا الله. يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، زدني من الإيمان الله يا الله.
الدين ناداني للخير أوصاني، الدين ناداني للخير أوصاني، والذنب أضناني يا خالق الأكوان، والذنب أضناني يا خالق الأكوان، الدين ناداني للخير أوصاني، الدين ناداني للخير أوصاني، والذنب أضناني يا خالق الأكوان، والذنب أضناني يا خالق الأكوان.
يا خالق الأكوان يا منزل القرآن، يا خالق الأكوان